Anyhow, Matt, how are you doing, dude?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Listen, I told you earlier, I'm delighted to have you simply because I didn't realize you had a talk the day before, so I hope you're not tapped out.
No, I'm good.
Excellent, excellent. Well, Matt, again, as I mentioned before, Speedy Stream is about the people, and I'm going to ask you right now to introduce yourself.
Cool. Yeah, I'm Matt. So I've been running a company called DebugBear for the last like 7, 8 years, kind of working in the web performance space. So we started out like, as a synthetic monitoring, like PHP testing tool, something like site health monitoring. And then, yeah, over time, shifting a lot more like to like general core vitals, adding release and monitoring, and all that kind of stuff.
Awesome. And is now you said you've been doing that for the last 7 to 8 years, correct?
Yep.
And previous to that, were you, where were you, if you don't mind me asking?
So I was working as a front-end developer. I was working at the website builder. So that's kind of where I started working on performance because people build a website and then they test it with PHP Insights and they see a big red number and they get scared that, they're not going to get any traffic from Google. And then they kind of start complaining and, we ended up looking into like their sites and what we can do to make them faster.
Mm. And is this a website builder that is, kind of well known, or is it like one just like a small independent?
I don't know. I haven't kept up with it. I think so. They're called Striking A. I think that, like there's the, massive $1 billion website builders, Squarespace, Wix that everybody knows today. I think, I don't know what they're doing or what they're up to these days.
You basically don't care.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think when I was there, they kind of switched away from like the product I was working on and kind of built this like WeChat mini program thing.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, I have no idea what's going on there.
No problem, no problem. Now you're mentioning that you're sort of starting to work in performance there. If I can ask, and if you remember, what was your first touch point? What was your first sort of inclination that you were going to work in performance? Like, what really got you thinking about performance?
So I was a front end developer, kind of working on, single page React stuff. So it's probably mostly thinking about like bundle size, adding like new modules, how is that impacting like download time and like page load time.
Mhm.
Just doing some of that, kind of monitoring that. And then we also had like this project where inlining critical CSS, just like improve the first load of the website. Um, and that was what like the two main things that I worked on early on.
And that was at this website builder, is that correct?
Yeah.
So this is, this was your basically, how could I put it? Sort of like baptism by fire to an extent.
Yeah, something like that. So yeah, that's kind of when I started thinking about kind of monitoring and yeah, we were using speed to curve at the time. And I think one of the things that kind of always annoyed me is like they would tell us, well, you've got like 200 kilobytes of extra JavaScript code, but they wouldn't say, well, what bundle actually changes, like the app bundle, is it some like, extra third party file that was added? And I think that's kind of started make me feel like, well, maybe I can kind of iterate in that and kind of just kind of, being a user of the product and kind of knowing it is like there are a non-zero number of people paying for that kind of product kind of got me interested in working kind of more in that space.
Mm. Now, this is at the agency. So prior to being at the agency, you had not really kind of like your performance had not really come across your desk at all. Like you basically, I'm not going to say you weren't interested at all, but it didn't really kind of cross your mind.
Yeah, I don't think it's really something that I was thinking about that much, or a lot of times it was maybe more like a back end performance question.
Got you, got you. So now this experience over at this agency really got you thinking about, performance and eventually got you thinking about building your own tooling. So did you start building DebugBear while you were at the agency or just, you kind of cut everything off and just went all in on starting to build DebugBear, pardon me.
Yes, I started kind of basically after I stopped working there. So maybe just going back a couple of years before that, I was kind of very into developer tooling, kind of Chrome dev tools, JavaScript debugging. Um, had a big phase just kind of, doing conference talks about that and like, writing blog posts about new Chrome dev tools features. And then, yeah, so I kind of left that job, started working on something. And I think the H1 at the time was like something really confused, like front end code monitoring. Um, and I think there are two key features. One is kind of measuring like page load time, page weight. And then we also have this kind of archive view where you can be like, well, I'm going to open my JavaScript app like it was like a month ago, and it loads the old bundle, it loads all the old data. Um, and I think my thinking was like, I'm going to spend the first 2 months like working on these two things, and then I'm going to build all these other more generic like JavaScript debugging features. But then what people really cared about is like the performance tooling. So yeah, we got rid of the page archive stuff and really turned into like a performance tool. So I don't think I really decided I want to build a performance tool. It was more like people wanted me to build a performance tool and pay for it.
um, Now, as you're building this tooling and sort of, kind of getting a hand on, like you'd mentioned what people were asking for versus what you thought, would work out fine. Um, I'm sure there was some tooling out there. Like obviously, you said your agency was using SpeedCurve. Is there anything else that you had seen that people were like, mentioning in terms of tooling? And then did you look at some of their features and say, okay, maybe I could do this or I can do this better or what have you?
No, I don't think I thought about it that much, which, looking back almost 10 years now, probably was not the right decision. I think I was pretty naive to like the whole web performance world. Like, I'm not sure I really understood like when double-clicking requests, like, 8, 9 years ago. Um, I didn't really know about, server connections, that kind of stuff. Um, and I know it was like within like the first 6 months or so, working on DebugBear. I went to a talk in London by Pat Meenan, and he was kind of talking about, well, the data that you get from DevTools actually isn't very good. And at the time, we were still kind of using the DevTools data. So I think for me, it was kind of like a slow, long kind of learning journey rather than something where I really started out knowing what I want to do and the kind of research that I should start out doing.
Hmm. Shout outs to Pat Meenan. I should reach out to him. I haven't spoken to him in a while. Love him. I was always fascinated by his talks, so whenever he was around and I was at the same conference, I would just carve out some time and make sure I attended his presentations because they were awesome, you know. Almost getting back to the whole, browser conversation that we had prior to jumping on the stream. Anyhow, so obviously, hearing people like Pat Meenan speak had a modicum of influence on some of your thinking. Is there any other sort of like presentation that you've seen in the past really kind of marked you?
So I think I'm a big fan of like Robert Marx's work. And I think 2 years ago, he did this kind of presentation about like HTTP resource, like server side priorities. And I think I always like looked at like the request waterfall that we have in DebugBear, and it's like, oh, well, there's some data arriving here. And I'm like, I don't really know why data arrives, for different resources at different points in time. And then, yeah, I think but I never really thought about it that much either. And I feel like that talk just really cleared up a lot of things just I just didn't have any idea about.
Mm, definitely, definitely. And again, I've always been a fan of this sort of deep dives that you get from particular talks that really kind of clear up some of the issues that you thought would either solved or you understood, and out of nowhere you're like, actually, I had no idea this was this was taking place. So that's good to hear. Um, so now, DebugBear's been around how long now?
Uh, I think a bit over 7 years around.
Yeah, yeah. And, is was there a point uh at any point during those 7 years, and maybe it's potentially more recent, but at which point did you feel like DebugBear had, quote unquote arrived? Like obviously, there are points in any kind of sort of like small startups journey where you're like, okay, we're pushing along, things are looking good. But then was there a moment where you're like, actually, I think, this version of DebugBear is definitely solid, and even though you're starting you keep making little updates here and there to either user experience or some features that come along that you want to make sure are added, but was there a point At which point did you feel like DebugBear was like officially here?
I think I just keep going through phases where I'm like, oh, we've made so much progress. And then like a year later, I'm just deeply embarrassed of like how terrible the design is and how everything is to use. And then we're like, oh, we need to kind of fix that. I mean, it's kind of sometimes it's hard to kind of tell apart how good the product is from like, marketing and actually like being able to find the people who kind of use the tool and they need the tool. I think kind of in like mid 2020, kind of, but like we just started getting kind of more customers. So I think we lost like a third of our revenue like early on in 2020 just because I think our biggest customer was like cruise ship booking website. And then I started kind of just doing contract work. And then like while I was doing, we just kind of started, getting more revenue than we had at the beginning of the year, and like things started looking good again. And yeah, I think that kind of gave me kind of more motivation to kind of focus or like, feel like it's not a total waste of time to kind of work on this long term.
Mhm, mhm. And at this point, this is, fully, as we like to say in French, le gagne-pain. You are working on DebugBear full time, full stop.
Yeah.
Awesome. And how big is the team?
I think we have like 4 people at the moment.
Oh, awesome, awesome. I didn't realize that because I remember, at one point I thought, you might have been, like, running on your own. I'm like, "Dude, that dude's, like, hoofing, man. Like, the great product, the guy's solo, this is incredible." But someone's like, "Yo, I think he's got a team." And I was like, okay, cool." I didn't know, but, I want to make sure and ask. Amazing. So now, DebugBear's been around 7 years. You have, like, a nice customer base. Uh no need to name names, but in terms of like your client base, is it mostly e-commerce?
I would say no. I mean, that's one of the things where, like, just from a marketing perspective, it's hard sometimes to say like who's like, our ideal customer persona or anything like that, because it's really like anybody who cares about website performance. And so yeah, it's really like a wide range of companies. Like sometimes it's like agencies managing websites for other people. Sometimes it's like media companies or like a software company that has like, a large website that they use for customer acquisition. Sometimes it's e-commerce. But I wouldn't say there's really one big dominating kind of customer type that we've got.
Mm. And it's good to hear because even yesterday, my conversation with Andrea, he has a heavy e-commerce background, and so we talked a lot about that. And he talked about an agency at one point he was working for that had, I think, like 30 clients, and most of them were e-commerce. So he had kind of like gone through that. But ironically, the week before, I had Amrik on, and he talked about him sharpening his blade working at a platform that was an educational platform, you know, bingo. And ironically, even before that, I mean, after that, yesterday, I spoke to someone who talked about, government agencies who are looking after, performance. And I thought that was, a great reminder. I remember years ago, I'm looking at him, I'm forgetting, but we did this sort of like public audit of UK government sites, and but they had been working on things themselves as well. So this is something that that branch of government, whichever it was, that department, they were keen on looking after performance and a few other things like accessibility as well. Um, I got your message, Jonathan. All right. Thank you for tuning in via LinkedIn and YouTube or something like that. But I hear you and see you. Now, the reason I brought you aboard, sir, is because last week a blog post was published by Smashing Magazine and penned by yourself, and it was about monitoring. And I thought that was like a very, very important topic. And I thought we might want to sort of like jump online and talk about that. Now, um, when you were at your agency, and obviously you said you were using SpeedCurve, I believe, was that your first touch point with monitoring in general?
I think so, yeah. So I think I used to kind of just work as like a contractor for a long time before that. And, I was working in a job for 3 months. I wasn't really involved in like production that much. But yeah, I think that was the first job where it was like, dealing with kind of customer feedback and kind of monitoring our performance and like bundle size and all that kind of stuff.
And so at that point, obviously you saw the value from monitoring, which then translated eventually over to DebugBear, where, again, even though people may come in and ask for core Web vitals optimization and or whatever they want around the vitals, but I'm sure at some point they have to understand how monitoring works and the need for monitoring. Absolutely. So here's when you're working with clients that you sort of onboard and whatnot. Um, do you like? How do you bring up the idea of monitoring? Because obviously this is something that is not like a one-time fix. When you deal with performance, you have to let them know that it's like, hey, we're going to get your scores, quote unquote, or your user experience where it needs to be right now. But you also do have to understand that this is not a one-time fix, that the monitoring has to be steady depending on your traffic, depending on the amount of people sort of like going into your platform, making edits, whatever it might be. Uh, I don't know, it could be a publisher, right? But how does that monitoring conversation take place with some of your clients?
I mean, it's a bit hard to tell because, generally by the time I'm actually, having a face-to-face conversation with a customer, they already want monitoring. I think most customers probably come to our tool just kind of through the kind of Google journey. Google Search Console takes in the page for insights and they're not sure like, how do I fix this or what does it actually mean? And that's kind of how they end up with, some of our free articles, blog posts, the free tools. And eventually they kind of just like sign up to try out the product. Um, and hopefully somehow during that point they see the value. I think part of it is also like the larger the company is, they kind of start to notice that we keep having these regressions. Like we might have a project that's going to fix a problem. We retest, in with a one-off test or as page insights, and then like 2 months later, it turns out our scores aren't as good anymore as they used to be,
Mhm.
because stuff just happens. There's some developer who just kind of starts embedding like a 500 kilobyte GIF in their code, or there's a third-party marketing script that is being added by somewhere in like a completely different part of the organization. So I think just kind of those experiences are kind of what make people think, okay, we need to not just like make our website fast for like a one-off thing, but actually like have monitoring in place. So like if something goes wrong, we can detect the issue more quickly.
Absolutely. Let's, if you don't mind, let's pull up the actual the article that you wrote for Smashing Mag, so you can kind of go through the higher points and run through that. I see it, and I'm gonna add it to stage. I'll have to say, I stay in dark mode, so this was like a bit of a shock to me when you brought it on stage. I was like, oh my god, is this the same article? There's no way. But let's do that. Let's basically just walk through it and let people sort of like know and understand what they're faced with when it comes to effectively monitoring web performance.
Yeah, sure. Um, I think the introduction, yeah, it's just a bit about like, what are the core vitals? How does Google think about them? And then the next step is it's just like two types of data that are the main types of performance data. You can kind of synthetic tests, which are like you can run it just a URL, and then it's going to test the website in like a test environment somewhere. Um, which you have like really detailed reports and a lot of insight kind of from that. But it doesn't tell you all that much about like how actual visitors experience the website. And then the other type of data we look at is real user data, which is not as in-depth, but it actually shows you distribution of experiences rather than, this one single type of experience.
Mhm. Now, I'm going to ask you this, and I think you mentioned it already, but it would sort of like I feel like it needs mention. So you're saying by the time most people get to say a face-to-face conversation with you, you know, they are basically asking or they have questions around core vitals. Like that is literally the one reason they want to look at or look after their website's performance. Is that correct, more or less?
I would say that it's a primary reason. I mean, for some people, it's actually just like user experience, or like, especially if your website is like really slow, like you start users actually complaining and being like, this is a problem. and that kind of, gets people to pay attention to performance.
Mhm.
Sometimes it's just like some ambiguous reason where it's like, I don't know, the manager is obsessed with performance and like I'm supposed to fix my lighthouse scores or something.
Mm.
But yeah, corporate vitals is typically like the main thing, partly because Google is saying it's impacting SEO. Google puts it very prominently in front of people. And then Google has a real user Chrome user experience report. And like I think that's really helpful for people to kind of not to see, oh, Google is giving me like a bad lighthouse score, but actually like I really have these people who are waiting like 4 seconds for content to appear on the page, and it's a problem.
Mhm. And, I simply ask because there are days where I sort of like mentioned the idea that, performance, say, core vitals was like, okay, yet people kind of poking around and some knew, but the majority kind of didn't pay too much attention. And then when the vitals came around, I personally thought there was like a significant shift where you really had people wondering how to make some improvements, whether it be UX or just raw speed. And then they start to understand like the parts that are involved, like, the interactivity, the layout, and obviously the loading performance. So, I'm not saying that core vitals really just changed everything. However, I will say that they had significant impact on how people thought about, putting together the site and making sure that they were the user experience was as we like to say, copacetic as possible. Anyhow, I just want to sort of interject there, so I didn't want to keep you.
Yeah, yeah, like, I agree with that. I think there's like people like you and me and like various people on like the web performance channel who are just going on about performance all the time. Like I think the kind of median person who actually kind of thinks about web performance is like some marketing manager, like some, mid American stationery company, because they can just see, core vitals issues, and it's kind of just part of one of many parts of their job that kind of makes them think about performance.
Absolutely. All right, proceed, please.
Cool. Yeah, I think basically these kind of 3 steps kind of fast website that I've kind of been thinking about. And I think all the time, the way I think about performance optimization and monitoring has kind of changed. So I think I really started out with like step three, kind of being the developer who's like told, okay, keep track of, the load time and, page speed based on like, JavaScript bundle sizes and that kind of thing.
Mhm.
And I think that was when I started building DebugBear, we're kind of very focused on that and debugging regressions and kind of a lot of technical detail. And I think all the time, I think two things happen because people kept telling me, okay, I want to actually get my Lighthouse score within DebugBear. And I think at the time I was thinking, well, you could just run Lighthouse. Um, but yeah, I think people kind of wanted the convenience and being able to kind of monitor it continuously. So yeah, we kind of focused more on the diagnostics. Also just from like a kind of product activation perspective, like if you sign up for a monitoring tool, the first like 2, 3 days, just there's nothing for you to see there in terms of monitoring because you just signed up, you don't have that historical data. You don't have any kind of alerting yet. It's hard from a business perspective to actually get people to see that value. So I think that also kind of made us focus a lot more on kind of diagnostics and telling people how what is making a website slow and kind of going beyond just kind of showing the Lighthouse scores, but adding our own recommendations. And then I think more recently, in the last like year or two, I started thinking about it in terms of like identifying issues on the website, where it's like, some business person is like, I guess our website it's slow, but we don't know what pages and like really we don't know where to start. Whereas I think as a developer, my intuition is like, I have this page, I have been working on this page, please tell me something about this page. But I think, a lot of people who are just kind of starting out with performance optimization on their website, they kind of need to know, okay, what are the slow pages that I need to optimize? And for them, it's kind of most intuitive to not start with like one URL, but actually like, yeah, just the high level domain name and kind of trying to go and identify issues kind of from there.
When, I mean, there was a lot to sort of like process there, but I'll go to the very start at least. And, this has been that sort of like ongoing debate, on the interwebs and whatnot. Scoring, lighthouse scoring. And I know right now, the majority of performance professionals are always trying to make sure that people are not, concentrating, or their clients are not concentrating on the lighthouse score. And some go as far as sort of like the writing like scores in general, which I have my personal opinion. But is that something also that you're seeing and hearing a lot with some of the clients that you're onboarding? Are they often, if not always, bringing up a lighthouse score?
I think it is pretty common, yeah.
Hmm.
Um, because it's what Google gives them.
Hmm.
And, I can try and add some nuance to that and be like, well, actually, maybe in your case, the data isn't that reliable. Or, maybe, you have good cover vitals, so you don't really have to worry about the score as such. But
Hmm.
I mean, especially like, I might be talking to, I don't know, some marketing manager or something, but that person then has to go to their boss and like convince them, and that person has even less context. Or they have to go to like, the client who's actually paying for the work and explain to them what, they're paying like the agency to do is actually not worth doing. I think it can be hard sometimes to try and, get people to kind of change what they care about and what they prioritize.
Hmm. Hmm. Now, hold on for a second. I think I may have a question. Question is, come to understand there's a key difference between Chrome DevTools. I'm not sure if that is a question. I'm not sure. Jonathan, if you want to rephrase that, let me know. I'm not sure if I got it, but we'll come back to that in a hot second. Um, Now, also, so I asked about the Lighthouse score, and yes, are you finding that even when you do get, whether it be like a marketing person or a CTO or like a developer that comes around or an agency, is identifying the performance regression one of the, like, out of the three, between identifying, diagnosing, and well, I won't talk about monitoring, but do you find identifying is often one of the bigger challenges?
I'm not sure. I think maybe more it's like we want to make it easy for people. So I think people typically if they come from a core vitals point of view, they kind of come from Search Console,
Mhm.
which has URL groups, which itself is like a concept that confuses people. Sometimes, at least if you have a high traffic website, you can at least Google gives you a specific set of URLs that are slow, but it kind of varies. Like I think high traffic websites, I think it's easier for them. Also, they have a bigger team. Like you can just go to your developer and be like, give me like just some data or some analysis. Whereas like if you're, just the one marketing person and you kind of don't have an in-house development team, just kind of going from that step off to actually starting to identify slow pages, I think can be harder. But I think our strength is probably still on the monitoring and in-depth analysis side. So maybe the reason I don't see people so often like struggling with identifying issues is because by the time they would normally talk to me, they've already given up on, our product.
Got it. They're just throwing their hands in the air. Okay, let me not interrupt you again, and let's proceed.
Okay. Yeah, I think so. What's happened over time, basically, like what I'm talking about in this article, some of the features we've added kind of more recently, and then when you get to the monitoring part, that's like the older parts of the product. So I think one of the things is just kind of having real user data, which actually means like we can kind of cover all the pages on your website. Whereas at least the way we do synthetic monitoring is you kind of have to give us a list of URLs. So yeah, I think that can be really helpful to kind of see like what are the top pages on our website and what is the user experience on those, and then also looking at what are specific pages that are slow. And you've kind of hidden it here with this kind of annotation, but we have a single number for overall performance as well, telling you, okay, like according to the core web vitals, like on like 76% of page views, they actually have core web vitals across all three metrics. Because yeah, I think people who kind of come at it from like a high level view, they do like to look at that at the data in that way. And so yeah, I think ideally, like if you want to identify PHP issues, really good at data is the best way to go. But then, like you have to install Snippet and it's just kind of a bit of a pain. You might like do it for like a client website and you don't have a way to like really collect that data. But yes, I mentioned the Google Crux Chrome user experience report before. So Google actually gives you URL level data with page speed metrics, like if you get enough traffic. So you can actually just scan your entire sitemap and check, okay, what are specific pages where we know that people are having a bad experience, and then just kind of start doing synthetic monitoring for those.
With the synthetic and rum conversation, has there been any hurdle in sort of getting that messaging across? Because a bunch of us knew that there'd been so much work around Lighthouse and, people really clinging on to the whole scoring and now getting people to really understand the rum element of monitoring, you know, is that something that they're grasping right away?
The difference kind of between synthetic and real user scores.
Mhm.
Mostly, I think it's a challenge. It kind of depends. Like if you look at PageSpeed Insight, it immediately kind of introduces you to that discrepancy between the real user data and the synthetic data. So I think it's often like a challenge people encounter fairly early on. As a result of that, they kind of start, I think, building up some understanding of this idea of, oh, there's different data types that are collected in different ways. And it's not that any one of them is kind of correct or incorrect. It's just like they're telling us different things about the website in different circumstances. But I think like people struggle with like, well, why is DebugBear giving us different scores and PageSpeed Insights? Why is it that if I run Lighthouse in Chrome DevTools, it's not giving me the same data as, if I run it in WebPage Test or GTmetrix? And it can be hard to resolve that. So I think that we can sometimes tell people, okay, yeah, just change your, device setting and say, probably 150 millisecond round trip time. It is a default for Lighthouse and Page Insights. Maybe that doesn't really reflect what a typical visitor is for you. But I think that's kind of like a kind of journey in terms of kind of learning about some of the nuances that people have to go on. And it's kind of, like an advanced thing. And then, maybe like you as one person, you understand this advanced thing and why you have to do it. But now, you're going to other team members and people in your organization and you get that same challenge of like, how do you justify that, the numbers that you're giving them are kind of somehow better than the number that they see themselves in like PageSpeed Insights, for example.
Hmm. And, I always ask simply because I've always felt that as much as we had that hurdle to get people to appreciate, and understand web performance, and obviously Google came around with the Lighthouse and Lighthouse scoring, people clung on. I felt, and this is from like being on the front lines, people were really clinging on to that. And now, the conversation was like, okay, how do we get people to understand there's rum involved? And this is what you want to also consider in all decision making. And then we suddenly had this sort of, that meme that you get on social sometimes, that dude with like the pyramid and the like the graphics, like the math graphics kind of flying around his face. I felt like sometimes that's what the modern client looked like when you brought up web performance. Oh my God, I almost lost myself. Um, but yeah, and again, I like to get the feedback from all guests, especially if they're kind of client facing, and to hear what it's like on front lines when they have those kind of conversations. All right, let's kind of like proceed through this sort of like monitoring experience.
Cool. What are we talking about? I think, yeah. Yeah, it just kind of talks about basically synthetic testing, kind of one-off tests, web page tests, PageSpeed Insights. And I think the main use case really is kind of the initial page load time and kind of really having that in-depth data about all of the requests. Like if you have a waterfall for real user data, there's all these kind of limitations for security and privacy that there's a bunch of data that you just can't see. Like you can't get the full response data. You can't see for third parties, like how large the file actually is.
Mhm.
You can't see like how does the browser prioritize each resource. That's probably like the biggest part for synthetic monitoring we've been doing, kind of creating this kind of in-depth request waterfall. So this is one example of kind of showing you like, I think it's like a background image that's kind of being loaded and it's only loaded after the CSS is loaded. Yeah, we're trying to kind of highlight the data that is kind of in the kind of amorphous blob of like, the waterfall and just kind of, yeah, give people more focused view on like some of the challenges or like some of the issues on what they can optimize on their website.
Yeah, page load time. And again, that would be around obviously the largest content for paint. Now, in your travels, what have you seen in terms of challenges? What do they come to you the most in terms of like the core vitals that is giving them the biggest problem?
I mean, CLS, I think people just aren't as worried about. So it's probably like LCP and IMP. I think LCP, I mean, one big challenge is like the single page applications, like some sort of edge cases where like, maybe the server side rendered code all kind of renders quickly, but then 5 seconds later, there's some change that kind of triggers a new LCP event. Okay, yeah. So I talked about, synthetic testing kind of being useful for debugging LCP, IMP, and to some extent like CLS as well, because that often happens when people scroll down the page or interact with the page, and you kind of need to know, especially in the case of IMP, like, first of all, like, what are people actually interacting with us, right? So we have the synthetic tool, the IMP debugger, and it's kind of stupid because it just kind of clicks elements randomly on the page and gives you a score. People love it a way more than I'm really comfortable with, and they kind of want us to build it into the product. And yeah, we've not done it so far just because, it kind of is random and like it doesn't capture the actual visitor experience. Or like, we might be showing you a bad score, but some elements that people never really interact with in real life. And, like you might fix that problem because it looks like a big problem, but, then you're going to come to us like, say, well, our IMP score didn't really improve, even though, we fixed what looked like the biggest issue. So yeah, that's kind of why you really need that kind of data where with your user data, you know what page element are people interacting with. And then using the long animation frames API, you can also pick up what are the scripts that are kind of running during that interaction. Um, and yeah, some of the times it's like actually like responding to the interaction, but I think surprisingly often it's kind of some sort of global event where it's like, like click analytics or, some global event that is just doing something every time, you perform any sort of interaction.
Hmm. And you mentioned something that just triggered a thought. I'm trying to remember the exact line, but um, uh, about pages that people are potentially not interacting with, and making sure that you know which ones. A while back, and a couple of years ago, in fact, I remember Etsy, who has done a lot of work in performance, by the way. They talked about particular pages that they were kind of going through, and they realized the amount of pages, or they realized that it's sort of like a group of pages that were never really being interacted with. It was kind of like, oh, they would look at the top like third of the page and sort of, bugger off afterwards. And they decided at that point through some monitoring that they're like, okay, parts of this page we don't need anymore. Like they had some image assets, that were, say, like two-thirds or below, or like far below, that were never being interacted with, and just took them right off. You know what I mean? So they made some specific and detailed changes based on some monitoring data that came back, and realized that like the interactions with these pages were just not happening.
No, I hadn't heard of that. That sounds really useful. Kind of see like what do you actually need.
Yeah, I'll find the article. This is quite a few years ago, actually, but I remember that specifically because they were saying how they were doing this big cleanup, and they're just removing assets that just were not being seen, let alone, the page being sort of interacted with all the way down. Anyways, I just wanted to inject that. So now, we've gone through this. So we have like monitoring performance and respond to regressions.
Yep. So I think that was kind of the original idea of what the idea was going to be about. I was looking at like people kind of come to us kind of with like regressions that they see in their data, and then not really knowing like what do you actually do about it, like how do you figure out what changed.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, and that kind of really varies like depending on if you have synthetic data or kind of real user data. So synthetic data, the good thing is that like in theory, the conditions like the network speed is always going to stay the same. So actually, if you see a regression in your scores or improvement, it should probably be because you actually changed something on your website.
Mhm.
So that kind of makes it easy, and especially if you have the continuous monitoring, like you're first of all you're going to get alerted when there's a change, but you can also kind of inspect and compare like okay what metric has changed and like what changed in the waterfall. So here we can see there's like a new image or new render blocking script that kind of is being added, and that kind of causes a delay. So yeah, I think that's probably just the kind of value you get in monitoring, but also kind of means that like you have the depth of data in synthetic test results. That's kind of just really helpful. And then yeah, with real user data, it's a bit more tricky because like what we see quite a lot is that, people they don't roll out big changes to their website all that often, but they do often start like a new ad campaign. And I mean, one thing with ad campaigns is like typically if you have a link, it doesn't go to your website. It goes to like some third-party tracking tool and kind of gets slowly redirected. So people might see like a big increase in TGFB when they start a new ad campaign. So the first step in like debugging or investigating like regression that you see in real user data is just trying to figure out, is it like, we've had an article that was really popular in India or something, or is it actually like a change that we made on our website and that caused the regression?
Absolutely. And, you mentioned the ad campaigns. I don't know who I had on who talked about this. It might have been around IMP anyways. And they're saying that often enough, some of these ad campaigns, you might the developer has done his work or their work, and they're saying, okay, everything's fine. And then, marketing, who has also hands into the site, and, they'll make some changes in terms of, ad campaigns. Like, I don't know, Black Friday's coming up and the ads are basically, increasing. And then you see these changes take place and how important these are. And again, it could be at the e-commerce level, that could easily be at the publisher level. A gentleman by the name of I'm looking at him, WordPress. He's not on the WordPress team, but Zach. What's Zach's last name again? Anyways, works at Condé Nast, and years ago he talked about just challenges of that happening. The engineering team's done all the work, and then marketing comes around, and boom, they do their work, and that's where there's a sort of like dual, a sword fight between the two teams. So he often talked about, like the ability to just get rid of marketing is never going to happen. The ability to get rid of ads is never going to happen. It's how you work with them, you know. And again, we get back to the idea of monitoring and everything that you just mentioned right there, how important that is.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I think like I mentioned before, like the more complex the organization becomes, like it becomes unrealistic to kind of have everybody educated about performance. So, people are going to like upload images and scripts, and you kind of want to catch it, or like, sometimes just like if you can automatically reformat, or like, I don't know what the term is, like, resize images, like that can kind of solve the problem kind of entirely. But yeah, you need some sort of technical solution rather than hoping that, everybody will understand the impact of what they do.
Once we've reached sort of like, we've covered a bunch of points here, and real user data. What else would do you discuss in the this blog post?
I mean, this is just, yeah, like the long animation frames data, which, it's just a super useful API. It's kind of Chrome only, but it just kind of tells you what scripts are actually running during the initial page load or during an interaction,
Mhm.
which like before, I think like March last year, that beta just, you didn't have it. There was like the long task API, which was kind of basic and it didn't have great attribution data. So yeah, I do think like for IMP debugging, it's a lot less difficult now than it was, a year or two ago.
Especially when it was basically, that transition between, I'm sure, first input delay and IMP, where people are just kind of like, okay, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? But good to hear that there's been some, improvements in sort of dealing with that. Andrea yesterday talked about how he spends a lot of time dealing with IIP issues for various reasons, and simply because a lot of the other challenges at SpeedKit are sort of dealt with through their tooling. But IMP is one of the things that he does end up spending a lot of time on. And by the way, folks, he talked about top three issues, and I'll cover that. Well, that'll be covered, especially when I publish the video next week. Anyways, that's just yesterday's talk. So we're looking at a conclusion here. So how would you summarize the idea of making sure that people are doing effective monitoring?
I don't know. I'm doing it. I think, yeah, it's kind of wrapping up, and I don't think it actually summarizes. It just kind of makes some general point about, uh, uh, monitoring is kind of useful. And I think the broader point is really like, I think I started out being like, well, monitoring or performance is about like the tiny technical details. And I think over time I learned more. It's like a broader strategy, and it's about like how different kind of actors in an organization kind of impact performance, and how you can kind of deal with the kind of broader system rather than looking at, oh, I added data fence or something to my JavaScript bundle, which is kind of how I was thinking about performance, 8 years ago.
As you summarize that, and you speak to your contact at whichever agency or whichever companies you're kind of having meetings with, do they understand that the size of the org and the amount of people who have input into the org's public facing site is very important to them, obviously, but is also going to be very important in terms of like performance and the kind of regressions that could come about just by having someone add like a news article. Say if you're the New York Times, um, how adding a news article would say like multiple images and potentially like some interactive graphic involved, how that can, create regressions on their site. Do they sort of like, are they able to grasp that concept?
I think so. I mean, I think generally just as the organization gets bigger, people, you have like an IT team and you're just kind of more comfortable spending on kind of monitoring tooling and you kind of see that value. And also like, even if you have some sort of kind of conversion rate impact, if you're in a really small organization with like 5 people, it might not be worth like making such a big investment. But like a larger company, I think they're just more willing to kind of have, somebody in like taking the SEO or like on the development team, having those people work together and, just be in charge of performance. Whereas I think if you are like a smaller company, it's just like a one-off thing. And also you just have more control about what's happening, right? You might not even have a tag manager. As soon as you introduce a tag manager, everybody with access can make some sort of change that impacts performance. Whereas I think I talked about this kind of education problem. You can solve the education problem in like a 5, 10 person company. If you have a 10,000 person company, it's just completely unrealistic to, for all of them to kind of understand like different image formats and like, render blocking scripts and all that kind of stuff.
Hmm. The education problem is one that remains, quietly. And I've been talking about that for a couple of years now, at least a few years. I think there is a challenge there. I don't know if you can see the chat, but I'm going to let you sort of like read this question here that came up from Johnny BMC. I don't know if you want to grab that. It says IMP, is that final field metric score on a given page URL, or in origin just the highest value found, or some average mean across the lifetime of a page visit?
Yeah, I would say, I guess there's a few ways to think about it, but generally at a page level, IMP, you can pretty much think about it as like the worst interaction. That is not technically true because actually it's like the 98th percentile. So like if you have a page that stays open for like days and, people have 2,000 interactions and one of them takes 5 seconds, that one slow interaction that, maybe isn't your fault even, it's just like some, Chrome is restarting in the background or something like that. And that's really causing the issue. So that's not going to hurt your overall score that ends up being reported to Google. Um, so I guess IMP like is a page level metric. You can also look at each individual interaction, and it's going to have I guess, an IMP score. But yeah, usually when we talk about IMP and we report it in tooling, that is close to the worst interaction on the page.
Hmm. Johnny, I hope that that sort of answered your question.
Yeah, and
Um,
maybe I think one of the things that if you look at like the IMP score, there's like basically actually like more than the level. So I mentioned the individual interaction. I mentioned the page level aggregation, but it's a 98th percentile. And then usually, like if you look at a tool like DebugBear, we report a 75th percentile by default. If you look at Google Crux data, that's also a 75th percentile. So like if you have an IMP score of like 500 milliseconds, it means it's going to be faster for 75% of your visitors. But, you know, 25% of your visitors are going to be waiting longer than that. And, maybe like 1% of your visitors, their IMP score is actually like 2 seconds or something like that.
right, right, right. And thank you for that question, Johnny. I'm gonna see if I missed any other here because
Yeah.
sometimes
There was another one about that sounds just very sophisticated, maybe above my level.
I'm just going through. I see another one here: low cost entry path to RUM prior SAS tool. Can a Node CLI Lighthouse plus Web Vitals JS library suffice to get basic pipeline going? Had one above on CSAT. Okay, so do you see that last one about the low cost entry to path to RUM monitoring? I would imagine.
Yeah. So let me take that apart because he mentions the Node CLI Lighthouse as well.
Mhm. And Web Vitals
Yeah.
library.
But there's certain things about I don't like about the default Lighthouse setup.
Mhm.
And I think somebody else, maybe that was also what they're trying to kind of pick on, were just kind of the dev tools difference to Lighthouse and like page for insights and different tooling using different ways to collect data.
Mhm.
Um, so I think at the starting point, and it can help you catch issues. And ultimately, I guess the main reason you have to kind of monitoring is to kind of identify potential issues. Um, so yeah, I think it's like pretty easy to kind of set up. Just have a CLI run in Lighthouse, and it will definitely show you something. Um, I tend to look at all the places when it's not working and when I'm arguing with customers about like why our data is correct and Lighthouse is wrong. Um, but yeah, if you look at low-cost entry paths for synthetic, I think definitely Node CLI is good enough. And then run that vital library, yeah, I think that can also work. Um, I think that's also like I guess one of our main competitors. And I guess the way I would think about what we do is a lot of it is really just, well, one, just taking away the need for you to kind of build up your database and query it and all that kind of stuff. But also like just the UI thing. There's a lot of like, let's say even you're not building your own thing, but you're just using Datadog or something. It's like they do everything. So you don't have like a Core Web Vitals dashboard kind of built in. And it's not as specific to kind of the data. Um, And I think one of the things we try to do a lot of times is try to give you the contextual data that we think you need. Kind of like I mentioned earlier about like debugging TTFB changes and like knowing that you actually have to look at the UTM campaign changes and that kind of stuff. But yeah, I think Web Vitals JS, I mean, that's, I think, a good starting point if you're just kind of looking for a low cost place to go.
Absolutely. Which, I forget about Web Vitals JS sometimes. There's so much tooling out there. I'm like, oh yeah, Web Vitals are still around. Um,
I am Googling CSAT and what that is, customer satisfaction score.
I am not, because I saw G4 amplitude segment funnel analysis. I mean, and folks, thank you very much for the questions, because I always forget to mention that, you could come in and do ask. And sometimes our chat is, our conversation is amazing, but the chat is like crickets. So sometimes I forget to look. But I do want to thank everyone for chiming in.
Yeah, I think that the last point, yeah, is around like a really real actual business metric and how that correlates. And well, I guess one is kind of conversion tracking, which we didn't have until recently, actually. So I'm not super familiar with how different people are using it, but I think I've talked to people and like they obviously care because like, why are we investing in performance? Like, what is that return? It can be difficult. Like, even if you have the performance data, it can be difficult to see like how do I turn the indicators of bad performance on the site into like developer budget. Um, so I guess the question then goes, which is more like relating, like, I mean, if you have something like Net Promoter Score, I think you can't really correlate it. Maybe you could try it. Maybe you could, have kind of one, ask the person, like measure page speed, for one customer, and then also ask the same customer and the, NPS questions, and kind of see like does that correlate.
Mhm.
Um, but yeah, I think maybe that kind of, still kind of reflects kind of my own approach to web performance, which kind of tends to kind of be very technical and focusing on optimizations.
Mhm.
Um, so yeah, we're currently at the conversion rate level. We're not quite yet at the NPS correlation level, I think.
Right, right, right. Um, No, this, and it goes to show how sort of like detailed some of this can be. And, I get back to that meme with, that math meme with like there's so much going on and you're just not sure where to start or where to look, which is where great tooling, becomes extremely important, where you could just kind of look at a graphic and look at a set of like graphics or a dashboard and give, or at least have an understanding of what exactly is happening. Um, and like you said, a lot of people just don't want to spin this up on their own, and they just don't want to sit there and look at like this CLI dump, you know. That being said, a couple of the things I wanted to ask. What um, DebugBear has been, successful, and you'd mentioned earlier, last little while it's been just like chipping away at little improvements here and there. Is there anything, big that you're trying to add to DebugBear in the next, like, I don't know, 3 to 6 months?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of talking about all the things I hate about the product and I think aren't as good as I would like them to be. Um, well, I think one of the things we're kind of just trying to work on right now is just making alerting better. Um, like it's a bit disjointed right now between synthetic and RAM. And I think one of the things that kind of comes up is like people want to not go alerted right away, but like have like this kind of temporal like delay of say, I want to check every hour, but like if it's over the threshold for 1 hour, don't worry about it.
Mhm.
I think we're very strong on like giving you the core vitals dashboard that has a lot of kind of details.
Mhm.
We are less strong in, giving you that freedom to like build your own dashboards and like give you control. So we try to give you guidance more than control right now. And I think we want to get better at like giving people a bit more of that, power to kind of create dashboards that kind of make sense for their specific use case. Like you might not really care that much about large content for Paint, but you care about, some custom user time that you've defined in your team, or like you care about the total, amount of page JavaScript code can load it. And I think maybe the last thing is just like making RAM better instead of like kind of RAM insights. I think over time, what we've done is spent a lot of time just kind of gradually, like, I used to have all these kind of, onboarding calls with customers, going through their performance data, trying to explain to them like how, they can, improve their website speed. And I think after a lot of those calls, I was like, okay, why did I have to have this call with them? Like, why was that not obvious in the UI? And over time, that kind of drove a lot of the kind of improvements that we made to the synthetic tooling and giving people very specific recommendations and filtering down the performance data. When I have these kind of conversations with people who are using RAM, I feel less happy with where it is right now. I think like we should kind of automatically detect, okay, was there a shift in visitors, or did the visitor characteristic kind of stay the same? I shouldn't have to do, like I mentioned, like the education basically, and like talk about it on the stream and be like, well, you have to think about it. It should really be like our tool kind of, surfacing that data and just helping people make those decisions, when they don't necessarily have, the knowledge of like how to best interpret the data.
So basically, kind of like a little bit of a user experience, hurdle that you're trying to get over.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And no, that must be really interesting because, things that are very obvious to you or maybe myself as well. But, when you hear someone talking about it, you're like, okay, they totally missed that. Is there something in the tooling that I can fix so that, it becomes much more clear, or you surface it in a much more sort of like obvious way. But no, that must be very interesting to have like these kind of customer calls and just listening and sort of like wrapping up, if someone has been fascinated with this conversation and looks interested, is very interested in hearing more about the Bugbear, how do they get in touch with you?
I don't know. I'm posting on LinkedIn about web performance. I, respond to LinkedIn messages. I'm also at DebugBear.com. So yeah, they can always email me there about questions.
Awesome, awesome. And obviously, if you guys have questions or you folks have questions about that monitoring article, I think I posted it already, but maybe I'll do it again just to make sure that everyone gets to see it. You can definitely read that over at Smashing Magazine. It went live, I think, just about a week and a half ago, tops. But if you do have additional questions for Matt, I'll have the information on the page. That being said, sir, I want to thank you very much for your time today. Again, I want to make sure that we thank you, Johnny, and everyone else that was here. I want to make sure that you had an opportunity to talk about this blog post that you penned, which was super interesting. Monitoring is absolutely a must when it comes to performance, folks. Again, regressions happen. Period. That's all you need to remember. So thank you very much as well for spending some time with us, and we will catch you soon.